you're very welcome to a Script to Story podcast series. So Jay, I have to tell everybody that you're not a native of Ireland, but you have landed here and you are as Irish as they get at this point. Tell us a little bit about how you got to this country.
So the year was 2001, and yeah, obviously I'm from Australia. I'm from Melbourne. But I always wanted to sort of like this side of the world, Europe, like the mythology and all of that sort of stuff. I was sort of drawn to it. So I just got on a plane in 2001 and ended up sort of over here, and I've been here pretty much ever since. And I just became an Irish citizen not too long ago as well. So yeah, I have all the rights of an Irish person now. So yeah, you're stuck with me now, I'm afraid.
We have seen so many Irish people go to Australia. Now you've come from Australia over to Ireland, so it's quite an unusual thing for us to get our heads around. But it's great to have. I've been
here a long time, and I still get that question. Don't you miss the sun? And it's like, yes, I do. Yeah, but today's a lovely day today. So
yeah. Well, Jay, we're here to talk about illustrations and illustrators. So. Right. The one thing that I'm always fascinated about is that how did it all start for you, or how did it all start for any of our illustrators, but how you in particular, how did it all start?
Well, we have to go back a very long way. I still have this very, very clear, distinct memory of being in kindergarten. So I would have been 4, I think, 3 or 4. And I remember it was around about Christmas time, and we all had easels and paints and things like that. And I remember painting a cat. I remember it was a cat in a Santa suit, and it was okay, but I kept on, I did the suit first, I did the red first, I did the hat, and then I did the suit, and I always didn't leave enough room for the head, so I had to do it like 4 or 5 times, and I eventually got it. And I still recall the kindergarten teacher saying, you're good at this, and that was kind of, I guess, the catalyst, I guess, back then. And ever since then, and obviously I was very young. I was the one in the school, in the class that could draw. So it just sort of built from there, and it was pretty much the only thing I ever wanted to do was to draw things. So yeah, that's the story of where it began, anyways. Yeah.
So then you progressed on to secondary school and so on. Did you pursue a degree in art in college, or what did you do? Like, how did you end up in this area?
Through high school, obviously, I did the school that I went to. There were actually, like, for the last few years, there were 3 art classes that you could do. So there was your sort of general art, and then there was like graphic communication, which was more of a design thing, and then there was studio art, which was something in between. So I was doing all of those, and the aim was to move on to college as well, to do some art degree, which never really, I think I ended up I did it for a little while, and it's because I guess my artistic leanings, they didn't really fit in with that sort of world, I guess, the artistic world. I would never really consider myself an artist. I'd consider myself more of an illustrator, which I consider very different things. So it's pretty, so it sort of, it became apparent pretty quickly that it wasn't for me. So I ended up getting a job and cleaning dishes, I think it was, and just drew in my spare time, and it was always the dream to be an illustrator full time. And it takes a long time to get to that point.
So that's actually an interesting thing that you've said, and that I can agree with, that artists and illustrators,
very different.
Art, like people often think of artists as like fine art, but illustration is a very different type of artwork. It takes an exceptional amount of concentration. When you see the illustrators work an exceptional skill level, I'm not saying there isn't a skill level in the other pieces of art, but when I see it with the detail that one has to go into in order to create, with a line sketch to create something magnificent, there is a huge amount of work in illustration.
It's true. Sorry, continue.
I wonder, would you give us a little bit of an insight into the world of an illustrator?
Yeah, well, you could say, I think that the lure of illustration for me was telling a story, which I think is probably the one thing that sets it apart from fine art. And I certainly don't have anything against fine art. I love fine art, but I always thought that illustration was where people that could really, really draw were drawn to, whereas, yeah, I mean, it's a big statement that, but I think it sort of holds true. I think some of the greatest like practical draft people are illustrators and not fine artists, and that was always the thing that sort of attracted me, was the nitty-gritty of the actual application of the illustration and telling a story and doing it visually right. You know, it's visuals are so important in illustration, perhaps more so than in fine art as well, because with fine art, it's an idea, it's a concept, but illustration is all about getting across
Exactly.
a narrative. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
I noticed with illustrators that, in particular, I noticed with illustrations in children's books that you really are telling a story, and for the illustrator, there is even a story hidden within the story of the illustrations in children's artwork.
Yeah.
And that's something that you are very strong. That's your strength. I have noticed with the illustrations for Annie Piggle that you created a story within every story. You know, you created a story behind the illustration again. So it wasn't just the illustration of the particular piece of writing. You actually created something beyond that again. And it's very few illustrators that actually have the capacity to do that. It takes a huge amount of, I think, it takes years of experience, I think, maybe, and a skill set that not everyone has. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about how you can create the story within a story?
Sure. I mean, it's a very interesting point you brought up, because it's something that's been on my mind quite a bit lately, because I'm writing and illustrating my own things. And it's very much a case of, you have a story which, you know, is obviously linear and it goes from start to finish, but you also have illustrations that sort of, the way I look at it, they sort of weave in and out of the story, as in, you can have, as you said, you can have a story in the illustrations on top of the words. And you're absolutely right. It's, once you get that mindset of knowing that you can tell this other story with background elements and all these sort of things, it does really open up an extra level, an extra degree, an extra, all these words are escaping me now, but yeah, it's like just, it's almost like you're giving the reader two stories for the price of one, because there are, and you look at the Gruffalo, the amount of things that are happening in the background. It's just an extra layer, an extra dimension is what I'm looking for. And I think it's really important that you don't overplay that, because that's, you know, obviously a bad thing as well. So getting that fine balance between making sure that the words are catered for, but also creating something else for the, you know, because visuals are so different to story, and a good writer will leave the space for the illustrator to add things that they would never have thought to. So yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of an excellent illustrator. You just you're in awe of what they create. There are no words for you. For me, I'm an author, so I write, and to see an illustrator create something that you have written and bring it to life to a level that you really, it's dumbfounding for you as a writer, you know, that they actually entered your world and they got it. And it's a phenomenal skill for an illustrator to just be able to do that, read the story and get it, you know, understand what exactly it is you want to say. And more.
And I guess because we think visually, so I think that's, like, whenever I'm reading something, the images sort of do pop into my mind, like, you know, almost fully formed. So it is really just a case of sort of pulling out elements of things that appear in your mind and applying them to the illustration, making sure that it's all about cohesion. I think it is just making sure that there is a really good balance between the script and the illustrations, and make them sing together, I guess.
So just in case people are wondering, so we've kind of jumped ahead about 10 years maybe.
Oh yes.
We were like in the middle of, you traveled, or I don't know if you immediately came to Ireland, but you took a different route to the route that the university was showing you. So you moved in a different direction. But there are a lot of people who would walk away at that point and give up on their illustration. What's kept you going?
Another great question. I think it was always the thought that I had the chops to be good at it, and that not necessarily that, if it'll just happen, because I don't believe in things just happening, or if you put something out into the universe and it'll answer your call. I don't think that's true. But I think it's all about perseverance. Things happen for you. So it was a kind of combination of, I knew I could do it. I just had to go and do it, because there was never any situation realistically that someone was going to knock on my door and say, I've got this book and I need illustrations for it, which does happen, but you can't rely on it. So it was always a case of just build the skills, take the time, put yourself out there. And again, there's no guarantees that putting yourself out there is going to equate to anything, because I imagine there are thousands of people that have done just that and nothing has come of it, which is a terrible thing, I think. And it kind of does keep me awake at night, the thought that there's no next job or anything like that. So it's all about going out there and finding that next job rather than waiting for it to come to you. So it was always perseverance and dedication to the craft, and just like always improving, I think, is the important thing. You always want to be better than the previous illustration, even if it's not the case, and it certainly isn't the case, but you've always got to go into it thinking that way, that you want to be better than the previous illustration. Or what's the point? You never want to rest on what you've done before. You're always seeking, as an artist illustrator, because you always know you are better than what you are, so you're always chasing them, I guess. So that was the drive for me.
I can't see then in that there could be anything other than success for you, because you're always improving your skill, you're always putting yourself out there. In saying that, I just want to say something. I was talking to, we're in the Script to Story podcast series at the moment, and I've had a number of illustrators on at this stage, and putting yourself out there is not an easy thing for an illustrator. It's not natural for an illustrator, because your world is such an inward place. When you're drawing, when you're illustrating, is there any platform there? What's the platform that if people want to find an illustrator, or if illustrators want to be found, where do they go?
That's a thing that seems to change a lot, and it really does depend on the type of thing that you do. Like for children's books, that's probably not so easy as like comic artists or fantasy artists or computer game artists. There are all these different applications and places for that sort of specialize in those areas. So children's books, I don't know if they're, I would say probably Instagram would be the best place, and it's just about, again, putting yourself out there. And it's a lot easier putting yourself out there when you're just trying to attract attention over a computer screen. But I'm getting to the point where I am going to be seeking an agent, and that's a whole different kettle of fish. And obviously we'll talk about that later. But I think my advice for people that were looking to put themselves out there and weren't too sure where to go, I would just look at the people that you admire that do similar things to you and see what they do, and just replicate. I think that's, if there's a doorway to success and you want to go through that doorway, you've got to be quick about it too, because there's this old saying that creative people, if they find a doorway to success, they're going to close it behind them so that nobody else gets in behind them as well. So just find that avenue and just go for it. Research is really important, but it can be very quick. All you have to do is find out where the people that you think your work sits well with, where they are, and go there.
So now that we've spoken about different things in relation to illustration, what's your favorite thing to illustrate? Are you comic? Are you children's books? Are you adult fiction? Are you, I don't know, you tell us, what's your favorite? What's your
past, I used to make my own comics. So there's like this one here, it's fully painted cover, and I used to do illustrations and all. It was comics for a long time. but they always had a sort of fantasy element to them. So then I did a lot of fantasy illustration as well for a lot of games, which I've got some here. I can prepare. So this is one of the great magazines that's still around. If you're an illustrator, it's a really great one. Imagine FX, and I managed to get a spread in it.
Oh, fantastic! That's really good.
So that's more of my that's my fantasy illustration sort of stuff, black and white anyway. From a very young age, the lure has always been with children's books, and I think whenever I look at the future that I want as an illustrator, it's always with children's books, picture books, chapter books, all of that sort of stuff. Just love all that. So it's the only thing I'm really concentrating on at the moment. So.
Projects for the future? What's happening in the future? What's Jay Penn's future looking like? I know now, in saying that, we're in a pandemic and there's very few books being published at the moment because we're in a pandemic.
Yeah.
But what are the hopes for the future?
The future is bright for me. The things that I'm working towards, I'm sort of, I'm happy that I'm in a situation. I know that the agents and publishers they love an illustrator that can write. And if you look at some of the great books out at the moment or in the last 10 years, that's a lot of writers / illustrators. So I happen to be one of those. So I have a chapter book that I'm working on, and they're all sort of like fantasy sort of themed, like fairies and things like that, and goblins and gnomes and trolls and that sort of stuff, which is the stuff I just love the most. So I'm working on a chapter book, and I have about 4 really solid picture books that I'm also working up the proposals for to look at agents and publishers as well. So busy.
The future looks very bright for Jay Penn. Jay, thanks very much for being with us here in the Script to Story podcast series, and we look forward to talking to you again sometime in the future, I hope.
Definitely, and it's been a pleasure, and you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.